Sometimes a local dispute is just a local dispute, but sometimes it blows up into something way, way bigger. What started out as a seemingly simple fight over an hourly wage in just one city quickly exploded into this massive, high-stakes battle over local control, civil rights, and constitutional law. Today in this explainer, we are diving deep into the fierce clash between the city of Birmingham and the state of Alabama, and specifically looking at exactly why Alabama stepped in to block Birmingham's wages. Here is our roadmap for today. First, Birmingham raises the wage. Second, Alabama blocks the hike. Third, the racial discrimination lawsuit. Fourth, the federal court battles. And finally, number 5, a national preemption trend. Let's get right into it. Section 1. Birmingham raises the wage. Imagine for a second trying to live on just $7.25 an hour. That is the federal minimum wage, and in Alabama, that is the default. It actually hasn't budged a single cent since 2009. Well, the Birmingham City Council was pretty unhappy with that baseline. So in August of 2015, they decided to take matters into their own hands. They passed an ordinance to incrementally raise their local minimum wage up to $10.10 an hour. But here is where things get really wild. As the state legislature started mobilizing to block this wage hike, Birmingham essentially scrambled. They strategically rushed the implementation date up to March 1st, 2016. And because of this frantic legal maneuvering, Birmingham's workers actually had a legally mandated higher minimum wage for exactly one single day. Yep, just one day before the state government intervened. Section 2. Alabama blocks the hike. The state's response? It wasn't just aggressive. It was blindingly fast. We're talking a procedural lightning strike. In a mere 16 days, House Bill 17-4 was introduced, fast-tracked, passed, and signed into law by Governor Robert Bentley. 16 days! So what did this incredibly swift legislation actually do? Basically, it stripped cities of any power whatsoever to set their own wages or employment benefits. The sources point out a really stark divide in how this went down, too. The bill passed exactly on party lines. It was supported entirely by white state legislators, and it was opposed by every single black legislator. Now, why exactly did the state step in so aggressively to block Birmingham's wages? Well, Alabama's argument was purely economic. Think about it from the perspective of a business operating across multiple city lines. Having a patchwork of different local minimum wages could become a total administrative nightmare. So the state argued that keeping labor regulations strictly at the state level ensures uniform, predictable policies for employers all across Alabama. That was their core justification. Section 3. The racial discrimination lawsuit. As you might guess, the legal blowback to this was immediate. The NAACP and a group of local workers filed a federal civil rights lawsuit, and they came out with a very heavy core allegation: intentional discrimination. They argued that by overriding local control, the state was actually violating the Voting Rights Act. Their claim was that this law effectively transferred power from a majority black local electorate in Birmingham to a majority white statewide electorate. To back this up, the plaintiffs built their case on a truly staggering demographic contrast. Let's look at the numbers. Birmingham, the city that was stripped of its wage hike, is 75% African American with a poverty rate of over 25%. Now compare that to Mountain Brook, which is the district of the state representative who actually sponsored the block. Mountain Brook is over 97% white with a median income of over $130,000 and a poverty rate of less than 3%. It is a night and day difference. And when you look at who actually lost out when the wage hike was canceled, the data is just as striking. According to the plaintiff's evidence, 70% of the Birmingham workers who would have benefited from the raise were African American. And this cancellation was compounded by an already existing racial wage disparity in the city, where white earners were already making an average of $1.41 more per hour. Section 4. The federal court battles. What followed all this was a multi-year legal roller coaster. The suit was filed in 2016, and initially, it was dismissed by a district court in 2017. But then, we get a massive twist in 2018 when an appellate panel actually revived the claims. And then finally, in 2019, the full 11th Circuit Court of Appeals stepped in for a decisive ruling. It was an absolute ping-pong match in the courts. To really understand that 2018 revival, we have to talk about something called the Arlington Heights Framework. This is a legal standard used to figure out if a law that looks completely neutral on paper was actually enacted with discriminatory intent.
The appellate panel used this specific framework to revive the case. They pointed to the rushed 16-day legislative process, the disproportionate impact on Black workers, and the historical shadow of Alabama's 1901 Constitution, which sources note was intentionally designed to restrict local Democratic control.
But that victory was pretty short-lived. In 2019, the full 12-judge court tossed the case out entirely. And the craziest part? They didn't even rule on whether the law was discriminatory. They ended up agreeing with the state on a procedural technicality known as standing. Essentially, they ruled that the plaintiffs sued the wrong die. Because the state attorney general doesn't personally force private employers to pay specific wages, the court said he didn't directly cause their economic injury. So case closed on a technicality.
Section 5. A national preemption trend.
You see, Birmingham is not just an isolated incident. All across the country, state legislatures are overriding local wage laws, and the economic impact of this is absolutely staggering. In the studied jurisdictions alone, these state preemptions have cost 346,000 workers a combined total of nearly $1.5 billion in lost annual earnings. That is a massive chunk of change being taken out of local communities. This is happening right now in at least 34 different states. And much like what we saw in Birmingham, research shows these laws disproportionately freeze wages for women and workers of color. It's a trend that's often pushed by well-resourced corporate interests and industry groups. They use their influence at the state level to successfully bypass localized, democratically elected city councils. Which leaves us with a really profound question to think about. In a country with such vastly different local economies and varying costs of living, where should the power to set wages actually reside? Should it be left to your local city council, your state legislature, or the federal government? It's a high-stakes balancing act between economic uniformity and local democratic control. And honestly, it's a debate that is probably happening in a city near you right now. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking those tough questions.